Hello and welcome to Cyber Focus, your source for international business information. My name is Tim Smith, and joining us again today is Dr. Andreas Hauskrecht. Professor Hauskrecht is a clinical associate professor of business economics and public policy at Indiana University's Kelley School of Business. He has authored many German and English scholarly publications discussing global financial partnerships and structures. He joins us today to follow up on his interview with us last year on the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP. Now that U.S. President Donald Trump has withdrawn the United States from the TPP, Professor Hauskrecht will share his insights and the implications of withdrawal and the impact such a move will have on the U.S. and the 11 other countries in the TPP agreement. Professor Hauskrecht, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
In your previous interview with CIBER, Andreas, you gave us a nice overview of what TPP is and how it held both strategic and economic importance for the U.S. Could you remind our audience about the TPP and what it means to the U.S., the importance of the U.S. participation in it, and why the U.S. would benefit from being a part of that trade agreement?
Sure. So the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the idea goes actually back to the year 2005, where 4 countries started that, the so-called P4 countries.
Okay.
That is, it was Chile, it was Brunei, it was New Zealand and Singapore. And it was the idea to create a regional trade agreement. In 2008, more and more countries realized that this is a great opportunity. And a lot of countries joined the discussions and negotiations, Australia, Mexico, Canada, the United States, but also countries like Malaysia, Vietnam, and then particularly also Japan.
Okay.
So the idea was then to create a regional comprehensive trade agreement. We're talking about roughly 800 million people, 40% of world economic output, and roughly also 40% of world export. The idea was to create standards to reduce trade barriers. Roughly 18,000 tariffs should be reduced, but also non-tariff barriers. But also introduce standards, for example, for labor rights, environmental standards, protection of intellectual property. Also very important, procurement of state-owned enterprises, which is important for many countries in that region. And so this was an enormous effort to increase trade among those countries, but also to set the standards for the future.
Okay.
And let me say, this is one of the most dynamic economic region in the world. So it was an enormous opportunity, and the United States had at least 2 perspectives on that. The first one is economic. Since World War II, the United States was the front runner, the trendsetter, the country that influenced and set the standards in international trade, molding those standards, setting the framework. And so imagine from a perspective from Vietnam. The Vietnamese had to introduce trade unions, labor standards, environmental standards, procurement of their state-owned enterprises in order to be potentially member of the TPP. So it was a continuation for the United States, setting the tone and the standard in this super dynamic part of the world. The other aspect of this is political, because listeners probably paid attention when I excluded China from that. So this has an enormous geostrategic importance for the United States, because it was a way to contain Chinese influence in an economic and in a political meaning, and strengthen the American influence in the region. A great opportunity for the U.S. in both dimensions.
Great, thank you, Andreas, for that very comprehensive overview of TPP. Proponents of TPP say the president's decision will undermine U.S. competitiveness and influence in the Pacific region. while others view this as a victory for the U.S. workers. What are some of the key arguments for the two sides, and what are your thoughts on them?
The increased trade with this region would have positively affected, for example, high-skilled services. Part of TPP would have been access to financial services, legal services, accounting services, insurance, but also telecommunication.
Okay.
A lot of where the United States has its strength. So it's a lost opportunity. And in that sense, what we learned from the past is that bilateral, but particularly regional trade agreements, indeed have a positive trade effect, create jobs, and at the same time give a boost to productivity and technology development. And in that sense, it is a lost opportunity. Economically measured in terms of GDP growth, TPP wouldn't have been that significant for the United States. We are not very good in measuring that, frankly, but something like an increase in GDP of maybe $420, $430 billion over 10 years. Now put this in perspective. We have a GDP annually of 19 trillion.
Sure.
So the economic effect would have been limited, but net positive. I see more the strategic consequences. As you know, I travel very often to that region, and what we see, also given the rather aggressive tone of Chinese international engagement in the region in the last years, we see how the pendulum has slowly moved towards a stronger American engagement in all dimensions. And the TPP is only one part, although an important part, of these tendencies. And now withdrawing from the TPP from a strategic viewpoint, from a political viewpoint, is a very unfortunate decision. Now, people say it is a gain for the workers. This is straightforward incorrect. Now let me be a little more precise here. It is correct that over the last 30 years, unskilled labor in the United States has been left behind. This is covered by the data. But let me also say that international trade altogether for the United States is something like 14% of GDP. So obviously no one would really make the attempt and say with this 14%, I can explain all those forces and tendencies in the United States over the last 30 years. Rather, it is technological progress, automatization, that more and more replaces unskilled labor through other technologies. Now, people say they are against globalization. And you might like this or not, but now imagine I would say I'm against automatization, I'm against technological progress, I'm against innovation. And then you would say that cannot make a lot of sense. So the answer is no, TPP wouldn't have taken away jobs from the United States. We would have gained jobs. The jobs the people are talking about are gone already a long time. What people don't understand is that a country like the United States cannot be the leader in biogenetics, in airplanes, in satellites, in high tech, in high skilled services, and at the same time compete in light industries or in the production of garlic or shrimp. This is economically not feasible. So the question is, do we have a problem? Yes, we have a problem. And the problem is we have to make our labor force fit for the 21st century. What are the components of that? The first one is education, education, education. We have wonderful universities like the one we're sitting in right now, but we need more of that. We have to fundamentally reform our educational system to make the people fit for the requirements for the 21st century. And secondly, we probably have to think about a stronger social transfer system where we compensate losers, at least temporarily, for losses of opportunities and jobs, and use this time while we pay those transfers to train them better and make them ready. But if history of economics shows one thing, then hiding behind walls of trade barriers and reducing international trade, we had this experience in the 1930s, comes with very, very high costs, reduction in international trade, reduction in jobs, and particularly a reduction in productivity growth. Therefore, I only see losers, I only see disadvantages from the unfortunate decision of the United States on January 23rd this year to withdraw from TPP.
Thank you, Andreas, for that very thoughtful response, and thank you for helping to clear up a bit of the disconnect between perception and reality regarding the trade agreement. Thank you. So how do you think withdrawing from the TPP might impact other trade agreements made by the U.S. now and in the future?
This is a very good question. I would have thought that for example, the threat to unwind NAFTA was only propaganda. But I cannot rule out now, when I hear what's coming out of Washington, that they really want to try that, which would be, again, very unfortunate, because it is naive to think that jobs that went to Mexico will come back. Again, when we look at NAFTA, we have basically a balanced trade with Canada. That's not the issue. We have indeed an imbalance with Mexico, which has to do that American corporations use cheaper labor in Mexico. If not in Mexico, they will use cheaper labor in other places of the world.
Sure.
What it would do is just increase cost for corporations. It would increase prices for American consumers. You know, Tim, the most ironic thing is that all those new policy steps by the current administration will actually harm exactly the people who think that the new administration will help them. It will, if you do not enter trade agreements, if you even get the idea to unwind them or introduce higher tariffs, this will directly affect the people with middle and lower income. It will not affect the people with higher income.
Andreas, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for your insight, your thoughts, and I hope many people watch this video and hear what you have to say. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
That's all the time we have for this edition of Cyber Focus. Thank you for tuning in. If you have any comments or suggestions for future topics, please let us know at cyber, that's CIBER, @indiana.edu.